I am honored to welcome back to the stage. Well, welcome to the stage for the first time, Zachary Brewster. He is the senior pastor of the Change Church and president of Bridge Builders. He's the author of How to Get to the Other Side Principles to Pursue Your Potential, and that is available on Amazon, so check it out. Zachary Brewster, let's welcome you to the stage. Hi.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I recognize I have two tasks, not only to bring awareness, but awakeness. They always put me after lunch. So this is going to be very interesting. If you have questions along the way, feel free to write those questions down and just kind of wave them in the air. There are two people on either side of the room that'll be more than happy to grab those questions from you. We're going to save about 10 minutes at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So let's get started. You know, when I was a kid, this is what I did at the breakfast table. On the back of the cereal box, I was always looking for Waldo. There wasn't any iPad or iPhone. There was no TV in the kitchen. So I found myself over and over again as I was eating my Fruity Pebbles looking for Waldo. And when I thought about meeting with you today and having this conversation, I thought about bias in the workplace and how we know it's there, but we just can't always put our finger on it. So it's kind of like, where's Waldo? We're looking for it. It's hidden in the subtleties. It's hidden in things that we know that are happening, but we just can't quite put our finger on it. The other reason we can't find it is because we try to cover it up with a bunch of policies and procedures, and we say, if we put a bunch of policies in place, maybe they'll behave right, and maybe the biased people will act right. Well, I want to show you some numbers to prove to you it's not working. 42% of Americans have experienced racism in the workplace. That's 4 out of 10 employees are saying, I've experienced it. And these aren't employees of one ethnicity or one race. These are people that have experienced racism in the workplace. 48% of African-American women or 47% of Latino American women have been confused for custodial staff in the workplace. So they're in professional roles. It's kind of like Luis was talking about before. All he wanted to do was go to the bathroom and somebody asked him to bring him a menu. And this happens all the time in the workplace because we make assumptions and we have biases. Of those who reported bias, 33% of the people feel alienated in the workplace. That means they're there, but they don't feel like they belong to anything. They don't feel like they're a part of anything. 34% of people withhold their ideas. And this is very critical in what I'm about to show you next, because we need the ideas of every person in order for us to create a better workforce. 80% would not refer their employer. So that means they come to work every day and they're saying, I ain't telling nobody else to apply here. And so you're saying, we have a referral program, and they're like, don't do it, don't do it. And so that's a very big issue. The biggest number is 64 billion. That's the number of annual costs it takes to replace the 2 million people who are leaving your workplace because they see bias in the workplace. So you wonder why you have retention issues. You wonder why you have recruiting issues. It's because people are experiencing bias and they don't want to be in a place like that. Can we all agree it's not working? It's not working. The definition of bias. So by definition, if we can go back, bias is a prejudice in favor or against one thing, person, or group compared to another, usually in a way that is considered unfair. So I'm going to tell you later, and I'm going to have us all accept the fact that we all have some biases. The thing that we have to do is be willing to check our biases at the door. We have to be willing to deal with those biases, but we all have them in some way, shape, or form. When we think about the barriers to bias, there are three primary barriers that are caused by bias. And these things impact your workplace day in and day out. And my screen just went out, so I'm going to click this one and just look back over my shoulder. The barrier of interest. I talked about this with people not referring people to your workplace. So the reason you have empty seats, the reason you have empty chairs is because people are not interested in having other people come to your workplace and have them work with them in your workplace. And people don't apply to you because they know about the bias in your workplace. So even though you think it's the best kept secret, people know about it. And people talk about it, and they share it in their circles, and they share it at their dinner tables. You think you're only recruiting at job fairs, but you're recruiting at the dinner table. You're recruiting with people that know other people on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, and they're telling people, you don't want to work here because of what I'm experiencing, and if I can get out, I can't wait to get out. And that's why you have empty chairs. Number two, the barrier of innovation. The barrier of innovation is everybody looks and thinks the same way. And so the reason that companies have issues with creativity and creative ideas, and the reason they have issues in moving forward and catching up with things that are moving forward is because you have all the same people thinking all the same way. And it's fun when you're sitting at the water cooler, but it's no fun when you can't come up with an innovative idea. And so diversity is something that will increase your innovation, and is proven in the barrier of income. Companies that are non-diverse have income barriers because diverse companies have proven to generate 19% more revenue than non-diverse companies. So we have to be willing to take the first step. And the first step is we have to make the step of acknowledgement. Now, when we talk about acknowledgement, I want us to accept the fact that we all have a level of bias. And when we come into places like this and we want to go back and change the world, I suggest that you can't change the world until you change you, because you're a part of that world. So oftentimes we take initiatives, but we don't take reflection. It's because you don't take reflection, the idea that you can hold the bias and still try to help somebody else change their bias, it just doesn't work. So often we are outward looking instead of inward looking, and the truth is you're a part of the problem. And unless you accept that you're a part of the problem, you can't be a part of solving the problem. So the first step is acknowledgement. So there are 5 common workplace biases. Write this down. 5 common workplace biases. Now, there are 16 biases on the list of biases. I'm going to give you 5. I'm going to give you the 5 common ones, and you're going to notice some that you may not have seen before. The other side of this is that some I'm purposely leaving out because we always talk about them. We always talk about racial bias. We always talk about gender bias. And I suggest that some of the biases I'm about to show you lead into those type of biases so greatly that it's a slippery slope. Y'all ready for number 1? Number 1, affinity bias. Affinity bias. Affinity bias says it's a bias that you gravitate to people who are just like you. This happens a lot in the workplace, a lot in the hiring process, because it has nothing to do with skills and qualification. It has nothing to do with the resume. It has nothing to do with the interview. It has to do with the fact we cheer for the same team. We hung out at the same game. We went to the same school. Oh, you're just like me. You live in the same neighborhood. Oh, your upbringing was just like mine. And we have such an affinity to people that are like us. When the people that are not like us walk into the room, they don't have a standing chance. This also happens in a thing that we call culture. And I'm using culture in air quotes because the truth is sometimes what we really mean by culture is that they're like me. And we're not interested in your culture in the workplace. So you can come in maybe, but you can't get promoted because you really can't relate to me because you don't like football, or you didn't go to the same schools I went to, or you don't hang out where I hang out. You don't like to have a beer after work. You don't like to laugh at the jokes I like to laugh at. So as a result, I have such an affinity to the people that I'm connected to in the workplace. To those who I refuse to connect with and understand them and see them, they don't have a fighting chance. And as a result, it creates affinity bias in the workplace. That makes sense to everyone? Number 2, conformity bias. This is a big one because we want people to come in different, but then we want them to march to the beat of our drum. So we have people come into the workplace and we say things like, I like your ideas, I like your differences, we're a diverse workplace. Let me say this, your website has nothing to do with your practices. So stop writing things that you won't act out. Some of you had the best websites in the world. It looks so good. But when you walk into the place, you tell people you have to act like we act. You have to walk like we walk. You have to move like we move. And anything that's different than that, it does not work. And so oftentimes what ends up happening is that people who are diverse, they get hurt more by these types of biases simply because they're not of the majorative group. And so affinity bias keeps diversity out. Conformity bias keeps the diversity of thought out. And so what ends up happening is you fall into those companies that are not gaining as much revenue because you have these biases and you are creating these barriers. Everybody with me? Number 3, the halo effect. This is my favorite one. I see this all the time. The halo effect says, somebody does one great thing, and no matter what they do after that, you have a bias towards the last great thing they did, especially if that great thing earns the company money. So they can be the top sales producer and they can smoke in a non-smoking office, and it's okay, just close your nose because they're bringing in all the revenue. They can curse somebody out and it's, oh, they're a bad leader, but boy, they're bringing in the revenue. And so the halo effect says I get so infatuated with that one good thing that they do that I ignore all the bad things that they do. And so this happens more than not, and especially happens as people move up the ladder and they have high ranking and things of that sort, that we can't get our minds off the great things to notice some of the challenges and maybe even some of the biases that these people have because there's a halo over their head. And I know none of you work in places like this, but believe it or not, some workplaces have sacred cows. And if you say anything about that person or if you have a challenge with that person, you may as well upload your resume tomorrow because you're going to have to go because you mess with the sacred cow. I see some nodding and smiling. And if they're in the room, just blink your eye. Don't wave. Don't eye. It's okay. Number 4, it's the opposite of this. It's the horn effect. The horn effect is someone does something challenging in the organization and they can never get over it. Doesn't matter if they do 1,000 good things. Doesn't matter how hard they try to work. You have pegged them in this one situation, in this one challenge, and you have a bias against them, and they're not your favorite person. You don't want to look at them. You don't want to consider them for promotion. You bring it up every time. They can do a 180, and it does not matter. You simply can't get that off your mind, that one negative thing that they did. And some of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we've managed in this way, we've led in this way, and the horn effect is a real issue because what ends up happening is oftentimes it affects groups that are the non-majorative groups. And we get this one thing in our mind, we get this one issue in our mind, and we can't let it go. And every day they come to work, they're trying to recover, and they're trying to run upstream. And you don't get the best version of them because they're holding back, because they don't want to do anything at all to get on your bad side again. So what ends up happening, as some of the groups were talking about awareness, you don't get awareness from those people because they're laughing at your jokes and they're not even funny. But they keep laughing because they've gotten the doghouse and they're trying to get out of the doghouse. So I'm just going to laugh and smile like it's funny, but it's not funny at all. I just wish they'd shut up. But I don't want to do it because the horn effect is affecting negativity on my work-life balance, and I can't come into the workplace and be the best version of myself because I made one mistake. How many of you made one mistake this week? How many of you made 5? I'm going to raise my hand and my feet. But the truth is, when somebody makes a mistake against us, and it's the wrong mistake, we can't ever get it out of our mind. That's the horn effect. The last, and certainly not least, is authority bias. Authority bias is a bias that says, based on your title in the organization, we will take your ideas more seriously. So we have this thought that all ideas are welcome, and everybody has a seat at the table. But if you sit in this seat, I'm going to take your ideas a lot more seriously than if you sit in that seat. And authority bias can be very challenging because it creates an environment of tenure. And anytime you get into an environment of tenure and the only thing that matters is tenure, then certain people feel like I can't speak up until I've been here long enough. The worst thing you can do is hire somebody for their gifts and talents and then put it in an incubator for 3 to 5 years until you feel like they've earned the right to speak up. Newsflash, they won't be there in 3 to 5 years. They're going to leave you because they can feel the authority bias that they've come into a room and they have a voice at the table. They have something to say, but you're not listening to them because they haven't been there long enough or they don't have the title that makes them feel like a fit in the organization. And so I list these biases on purpose because the truth is I suggested some of the nasty biases that we hate, the gender bias, the age bias, the race bias, they're all caught up in these types of biases. And so the other ones we try to fight against, and the other ones we come to places like this and we talk about, but we don't talk about these biases. And so affinity bias is the cousin to racial bias. Because I have affinity bias, people that don't look like me, act like me, I end up hiring everybody that's just like me. And I'm not intentionally being racist. I'm not intentionally not hiring people of a certain gender, but gender, but because we don't relate and because I don't have an affinity towards them, it is a byproduct of me hiring people that are just alike. And the same can be true of conformity bias, and the same can be true of the halo and the horn effect, because the truth is we get so caught up in people who are like us and who do things like us, we have a bias towards them, and the workplace is limited, and those barriers are being created simply because we haven't addressed these biases. That makes sense to everyone. So the second step, once we have a acknowledgement, then we have to do an assessment. An assessment. Now the assessment part of this is easy, but part of this is very challenging. When we think about assessing bias in your workplace, the first thing you have to do is go through a system of identification. You want to identify what biases exist in your workplace. Some companies are scared to death of this because it means surveying people and it means hearing things that you don't want to hear. Have you ever had somebody walk out and say, how do I look in this suit? But they really don't want to know it's ugly. They really don't want to know that jacket is looking a little tight. You might need to push away from the table. They really only want to hear good things. So the survey is really for you to tell them the things that they want to hear. And you'll be amazed at the organizations I work with, and they do these surveys, and we start focusing on the things that are blind spots, and they start explaining away the blind spots instead of accepting the blind spots. And the truth is, the reason that it's a blind spot is because not only can you not see it, but when I show it to you, you look away because you don't want to see it. And so we have to get to a place of identification where we really listen to what people are saying, embrace what people are saying, and accept the fact that I might have a blind spot that I need to pay attention to. Number two, investigation. When we talk about the investigation piece, what we must do is investigate once we've identified the areas of the blind spot and the areas of the bias in the organization is where the bias exists the most. Let me say this. Don't leave a conference like this and try to boil the ocean. You're not going to be able to do it. Don't leave a conference like this and think you're going to change the whole company tomorrow. You're not going to do it. You got to use a 5-point pen and ask yourself the question, what areas is it impacted the most by this in my organization? And that takes time. Sometimes it takes time that we don't want to spend. Sometimes it takes time that we like to sweep under the rug. Because the truth is, you want to get back to productivity. You want to get back to process. You want to get back to all the things, including profit, that you like to get back to. But the truth is, your productivity, your process, and your profits are all going to be impacted if you don't investigate this and ask yourself the question, which departments have these issues the most? And the truth is, some of you know exactly where it is, and that's why you don't put the good people over there. You put people over there that you'll say, well, that they can deal with that, or you try to acquiesce to the issue because you don't want to deal with it. So you have to investigate. Last and certainly not least, and this is the hard part, you have to deal with this issue of implementation. I want to pause right here and say this very slowly. There are some biases in your organization that are implemented into how you do work. And they're so implemented that by the time you tell somebody that is biased, they're going to be shocked by it. There are biases, especially the ones like affinity bias and conformity bias, that have become so much of a part of your DNA that when you tell leaders that this is a problem, they're going to say, that's how we do it. And it's so implemented into your process, it's so implemented into your environment that they're going to think you're trying to change the company, and the answer is going to be, well, maybe you need to go work somewhere else. Because it's a part of who they are. We always do it this way. Bob always says this. He always tells these kind of jokes. It wasn't a problem when we told them last year at the Christmas party, but they didn't see the other faces of the people, and the faces that were there last year not there this year, and it's okay. Have you ever worked somewhere and they always try to explain away why people leave? They make excuses for it. And when companies don't read exit interviews, what they're doing is they're running down a dead-end road straight into a wall. Because they don't want to see why people are exiting, they just blame it on the people that are leaving. And so until we get to a point where we assess the bias in our workplace to say, okay, I got to identify where this is coming from. I got to get myself to a place where I really investigate this and have listening sessions. In the best places where this happens, people not only do a survey, but they have roundtables. And they sit down and they have these conversations with people at all levels. And they hear them and they ask themselves the questions, how can we change this? Not only do they have these roundtables, not only do they have these listening sessions, but they ask themselves the questions, what are we doing and what have we implemented into our system that is so biased that we can't even see it? Let's go to the next step. Step 3 is action. Tell somebody next to you, take action. They didn't hear you say it louder. Take action. You got to take action. Listen, there's no need of spending time in this room all day just coming for a sandwich, just coming to see some dancing and hear a poem and not go back and take action. You've taken a full day off work. Some of you are glad you're not at work. Maybe you're working in a biased place. But when you get back, there's no need of going back and not taking on any action. You have to be willing to take action. So there are 3 actions to address bias in the workplace. 3 actions to address workplace bias. Number 1, sometimes there's some things you're going to have to remove. And this is the challenging part because removing things sometimes gets heavy. Removing things, especially that have been in place for a long time, that have been comfortable for a long time, that people have been complacent with doing a long time, it's challenging. Number 2, you have to refocus. There's some things you have to refocus. Not only do you need to remove some things and remove some practices and remove some behaviors, but there's some areas where you need to help the company refocus. And it's the refocusing part that I want to spend the majority of my last part of this talking about, because I think there's an area that we can refocus. When we talk about removing things, there are things you can remove in your hiring process, there are things you can remove in your interview process, there are things you can remove in your documentation that helps people feel more comfortable coming into the workplace. But the refocusing part is dealing with your leaders. I've been in HR and recruiting my whole career. And what I've understood is sometimes recruiting people is like taking water and pouring them into a cup with a hole in it. Because when they go into bad leadership, they're just going to walk in and walk right back out. It's a revolving door. And so it's not if they leave, it's when they leave. You only have 72 hours to make an impression on a new employee. That's the 72-hour rule. So I laugh at companies that do these 90-day evaluations. They've already evaluated you in the 72 hours. They've already decided when they walk in the door whether I'm going to stay here or not, whether I'm going to hang out or not, or whether I'm going to go ahead and keep my resume on LinkedIn because this isn't going to work. And the worst employee is not the one that quits and leaves, it's the one that quits and stays. So there's several people in your workforce, they have quit and they've stayed with you because they're just waiting on that next call. And so you're in your morning meetings and you're having this meeting and they're checking their phone like, I hope they call today so I don't have to be here anymore. And until you address your leaders and until you deal with the refocusing of your leadership, these types of things are going to continue to happen when you have bias in the workplace. So the 3 rules of refocusing. 3 rules of refocusing. First, you have to retrain. You have to retrain. I suggest that most people that are biased don't necessarily understand what biases they really have. I know I'm preaching to the choir. When I come to meetings like this, it's challenging because I feel like I'm talking to the good guys. You're the good guys. You came here to hear about your biases. You came here to understand it. The challenge is there are very few people in here when you really think about the magnitude of who's at your workplace. And some of you already today have said, ooh, I wish so-and-so was here, because if they were here, they need to hear this. And it's your job to go take it back. It's your job to push the agenda. It's your job to go and bring about change in that area. And so there's some people that you simply just have to retrain because they don't know how to think in this way. They don't know how to operate in this way. They don't know how to move in this way because they haven't been trained. And so when you think about this, think about the compassion that it takes to retrain people. I suggest that there are times where we're retraining, but we're retraining in negativity. So we tell people things like, you just need to be more like this. And they're saying, I don't know how to be like that because I've been this way all of my life. So when you retrain, you have to understand that it's a process, but the key is if they're willing to be retrained, they definitely can change. But they have to be willing to be retrained on how to see people, on how to approach people, and on how to lead people. Because some people, they're only comfortable leading people who are just like them, and we have to retrain people to think that everybody's not like you, but everybody can work with you. Is everybody with me on that? I'll take a clap. That's cool. Number two, you have to review. When you're retraining people, what I've discovered as a consultant, and it's very challenging, is I often get one shot to come in and do some retraining. But the retraining is an event, it's not a journey. I'll take your money, let me say that first. But if you want to hire me to come in and do some retraining, I'd rather take the journey, not the event. Because often what happens is it's an event. We come in for that day. We have a lot of good thoughts. A lot of good things are written down on notepads. We write on walls. Everybody has these heart-to-hearts. Everybody's saying what they're going to go back and do. And they go right back into the environment, and they don't do anything different. And there's no review of what we learned. There's no review of asking, is this really taking place? There's no review of saying, is this really going to work? And so if we don't have a metric-based way, a measurable-based way of looking at this, then the truth is you're just bringing consultants in and you're bringing training in, and some of your companies sent you here, and all we're doing is checking the box. And most of your trainings, most of the things that you have consultants coming in for is just to check in the box. Because when you really get down to the bare bones areas where you need to change, most people are very resistant to it. They don't want the change. They don't want to deal with the issues. They don't want to handle the issues. Because the truth is, change is hard. How many of you admit change is hard? It's real hard. It's hard to change anything. And so not only must you retrain, but you must review. Thirdly, and this is the sobering part, there's some people you need to replace. I'm going to say that 3 more times so the people in the back can hear it. There's some people you need to replace. And you know who they are. There's some people you need to replace. And as long as they keep working there, the biases are going to keep happening. And as long as they're in charge, there won't be any change. And as long as they are in the building, there's going to be challenges. And so when you deal with bias in the workplace, often what happens is the good employees are coming in and they're walking right back out. The new talent is walking in and they're walking right back out. The new initiatives are starting and the new initiatives are ending. And the same people that cause all the same problems, they never leave. Isn't that true? How come the good people always quit but the bad people never do? And so you can't wait for them to move. You have to be willing to move them. And the challenge is there's often an unwillingness to have a face-to-face, sobering conversation that says to someone, you are a part of the problem. And if we're not willing to have that conversation, I suggest that all of these are married. If you're not willing to ultimately replace, then don't bring somebody like me in to retrain. Because if there's not a consequence and accountability, there's no need of doing the training. If you're not willing to review it and at the review realize that they haven't done anything on the initiatives that we talked about, which ultimately should lead to some level of replacement, then there's no need of doing the retraining. So you have to deal with your biases and ask yourself the question, who are your sacred cows? Who do you have such an affinity to that no matter what they do in the organization or who they do it to, they have to stay no matter what? And if that is the case, and if that's the environment that you're working in, then none of the things I've said before now matter. You're going to go back to the same place. You're going to do the same things. You're going to do it in the same way. And next year at this conference, you're going to write in the same notepad. You're going to have the same feeling. You're going to have the same fizzle in your belly. And you're going to be doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And that's why they call it insanity. And so the question is, what do you need to replace? Who do you need to replace? And how serious are you about getting bias out of the workplace? I can tell you that if you don't, your doors will soon be closed. That if you don't, you'll never really be able to deal with those empty chairs that we talked about. That if you don't, you'll never really be able to ask the question, why people don't want to work for me. Because the truth is, people don't quit jobs, they quit their bosses. So every person that's ever left an organization, if you're a boss in this room, they left you. And if they didn't leave you, they left somebody on your team. And the truth is, we're all responsible. Can we just accept that? I'm responsible. I'm responsible when these things are going on around me. The last thing I want to talk about, when we talk about replacing, there's a beautiful image of an empty chair. That's a beautiful thing. The other empty chairs that I talked about were chairs of people not coming. Sometimes you need an empty chair that's the big chair. You need an empty chair that's in the corner office. You need to be comfortable with an empty chair with someone that's been sitting in it a long time. But the last thing you need to do, the last action, is to repeat. I need for somebody to understand that this is a cycle. This is not going to happen by the end of this year. This is not going to happen by the end of this week. This is not going to happen by the end of this month. That in order for us to really deal with bias in the workplace, we have to create a cycle of events where we're always retraining, we're always refocusing, we're always replacing those that are not a part of the way that culture is moving, and we have to put this on repeat. And if we don't put this on repeat, you're going to put turnover on repeat. If you don't put this on repeat, you're gonna put lack of revenue on repeat. Something is going to be repeated in your organization. Something is going to happen in your organization. I didn't even get into the lawsuits because the truth is, I don't want to scare you into it. I want to motivate you into it. If I scare you into it by the lawsuit, some things you do just so you don't get sued. I want you to do things so you'll be better. That's what's important. So, when we talk about this, I started this with talking about Where's Waldo. I sometimes miss this game at the breakfast table, but I don't eat Fruity Pebbles anymore. When I talk about this at the breakfast table, I was thinking about this when I was talking about how we hide things and how we can't see the bias because we cover it up. But I suggest that our employees, the people that work for us, the people that entrust us, I believe they're looking at a similar picture. And they're seeing all the bias around them. They're seeing all the inconsistency around them. They're seeing all the things that you should be addressing around them. And the question they're asking is, where are you? I'll take questions now.
I'm going to help you out with some of these questions. I'm going to read them out to you. That way you can answer them.
All right, I love it.
All right. I have 2 committee volunteers that are going to bring up any questions that were written down. Do we have any at this moment? And if you have one, instead of passing you the mic, we were just writing them down this time. And if you have one, just hold it up. All right, one over here. Did you have a chance to write it down? There's a gentleman coming right behind you. Okay, you can just ask it. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I suggest that any training that's going to be effective in any organization, it has to start with the leadership. I know people like grassroots efforts. I know people like things that are from the bottom up. But if you don't start with the leadership and there's not leadership buy-in, it's like pouring that water into a cup with a hole in it. Because if leadership isn't bought in, and if leadership isn't trained, and if leadership isn't connected, then it's not going to work. So my recommendation is that you start suggesting to someone who's trusted in the organization that, hey, maybe our leaders need some training because I'm watching these things happen. And again, I'm wondering, when are we going to recognize these issues?
And if you didn't have time to write down a question, we have one over here. You can certainly ask aloud. All right. When your executive leaders are the problem and don't listen to the subordinates, how do you promote change? Good question.
Are you on LinkedIn? I'm joking. I often don't think the answer is to leave. I think it's to stay, and I think it's to stick and stay. I think every organization needs to have a safe place. Maybe that place is HR. I'm not saying that because I'm in HR. Sometimes it's not the safe place, and that's the part of the problem. But I think you have to go into a safe space and a safe place and at least start having conversations with someone trusted in order to have those conversations. But I think silence is not your friend. Sticking it out is not your friend. Toughing it out is not your friend. You're going to have to go to someone on that leadership team who you can trust to share your issues with. Now, I suggest that you catch more bees with honey than you do with negativity. So sometimes you have to cater your answers in a way that is palatable for them to hear. But I think you have to create a way to have that dialogue and to have that conversation. And numbers don't lie. So not only the numbers that I showed you, those are the numbers about bias, but when you start looking at some of your numbers of turnover or things of that sort, because obviously if you're having these kind of issues with leadership, people are leaving, start asking yourself what numbers do they care about, what things would grab their attention, and use the data to get to the dysfunction.
Does anyone else have any questions they want Zachary Brewster to answer? Okay.
Sure. So her question was, people are using Google Docs for surveys, and everybody is writing the stuff on a Google Doc, and the person that is the owner of the Google Doc can see who wrote what. Well, number one, I wouldn't suggest using a Google Doc for a survey. So let's start there. I know Google is very friendly, but Google isn't necessarily the most confidential way of getting surveys answered. And there are other inexpensive resources that you could use to get these kind of surveys out. But again, I suggest that we use tools that are trusted tools. And oftentimes, there is a level of distrust in the organization, because if I don't feel like I have a level of anonymity, then I don't want to answer the questions because I feel like there's bias already. Now I'm going to get the horn effect on me because I was the one who blew the whistle, and then it's the horn effect. So I suggest that you use a better tool than Google, and I could get with you offline about some tools that we've used before for certain surveys that are a lot better. Strongly, I suggest a third party anytime you're doing any type of surveying, so that nobody in the organization has their finger on the pulse and has their finger on who said what, because third parties create a level of safety so that you can get the right answers and the truthful answers so that we can be able to really understand and assess the problem. Did I answer your question? Yeah. It's very challenging if you're using a document that people feel like they can't be honest about.
It was a very great question. We had someone write in a question here I want to read. This one you kind of did address, but I think they really want you to drive it home. If you don't wish to leave an organization, who do you address dysfunction with? Where's the trusted place to go for that?
You know, most times it is HR. That's not always the case. I understand that. I've met many HR leaders, and everyone isn't as confidential as they should be. I like to say I keep secrets for a living. So in HR, I make sure that I keep things confidential and safe. But I would say, ask yourself in the organization, who is that trusted leader? And what I want to tell people in this question is, don't be afraid to cross the lines. Sometimes you have to cross a departmental line. Sometimes you have to cross a functional line to be able to say, this is the person that I can trust. This is the person that I see modeling that leadership. And then the last thing I'll say about it, that is, stick your toe in the water. Don't just jump all the way in if you're not sure if you can trust that person. Stick your toe in the water a little bit. Get a little temperature check. Start sharing some safe things with them. Start having that casual conversation. Listen, everything rises and falls on relationship. So I would build the relationship first before I just jumped into the pool and shared all of my dirty secrets or all of my concerns. Find a trusted relationship that you can start building these conversations with in order to root out this bias.
Very good. We have time for one more question if there's any questions at all. If not, I'll let Zachary Brewster wrap up however he sees fit. Any more questions before we wrap up questions? Yeah, where is Waldo?
It's very hard to find him on the screen. I can't tell you I know exactly where he is.
Good question. All right, Zachary, I will let you wrap up however you see fit here.
I'm wrapped up. That was
All
the
right,
last
well,
slide.
let's give
Thank
it
you
up
guys.
for Zachary Brewster. Thank you so much for your time.